Hello, friends. Uncle Marv here, and welcome back to the Unhealthy Podcast, the show where we talk about fixing things in our life. You know, our health, our mindset, our relationships, and we do all of those things one conversation at a time. So, on today's show, let's start by framing it this way. If you've ever walked out of a doctor's office with normal labs but you still feel like trash, well, this is probably going to be an episode that you want to pay attention to. Maybe your gut's a mess, your brain feels like it's running on dial up, you're exhausted by lunchtime, and the best answer you get is, well, everything looks fine, but you know that it's not. So we're going to talk about that today. My guest is someone that I think would really be very interesting. Greg Lee started out as a NASA engineer and an IT guy who got knocked down by his own health issues and was told over and over that everything was normal. But we're going to hear about his journey and how today he runs the Lyme Research and Healing Center in Frederick, Maryland, where he and his team help people with Lyme, mold, autoimmune issues, and all of those long-term "what is wrong with me" type of things. So, Greg, welcome to the show.
Hey, Uncle Marv. Glad to be here. It's kind of like having a fireside chat with you here.
Yeah, well, that's what we like to do. I like it to be, casual and real talk and all of that sort of stuff. And so we'll hear your story today. And you've got an interesting story because it's not it's not every day that I get to meet somebody that was a NASA engineer and an IT guy, because usually those are separate by themselves. So you got to coordinate all of that, and now you're running a research center. So tell me about the early days. What was life like?
Oh, I grew up watching Star Trek, so I thought that
Okay,
was the way to go, man. I have to do space stuff. So, I did math problems, played chess, and I took a class with a geologist named Paul Lohman who worked at NASA right nearby, or University of Maryland. And I said, "Hey, you got any openings?" He goes, "Yeah, sure, come on over." Easiest job interview I've ever had in my
really?
life. Yeah. And so I went over, got a job, and worked as an intern and uh, looked at all sorts of geology stuff because my mom was a geologist. And so I grew up with rocks everywhere around the house. And, so I was used to that. And while I went to school, I ended up getting a degree in computer science and eventually came back to NASA working on climate modeling, working on space station, Hubble Space Telescope, working with robots. And when I was a manager in the robotics lab, I began to have really bad gut issues. Like I had to my gut was going to explode. Was like swollen, painful, and sometimes I just have to go to the bathroom. Sometimes in the middle of a meeting, so it's kind of like, oh, sorry guys, I gotta go. And it really started to take its toll on because I couldn't focus on because I was always worried about when's the next like thing gonna blow up.
Right.
And so I went to the doc and he goes, "Oh, you got irritable bowel syndrome. And here's some medication." So I was like, "Great." Took the medication and it gave me really bad brain fog. And I was sitting there going like, "Holy crap, I can't even think my way out of a paper bag with this medication." And so fell behind on projects and I was like losing sleep, having anxiety. It was like the lowest point of my life. And I was talking to a colleague of mine, and she said, "Well, why don't you try acupuncture?" And I had this crazy uncle. Well, he wasn't that crazy, but he had arthritis, and he was this expert on China. And he would take bees, live bees, and sting his arthritic joints with the bees. I thought he was nuts.
Okay. Yeah, I'm gonna say that would be crazy in any book.
Yeah. And bee venom has anti-inflammatory properties, antimicrobial properties. All this I didn't know at the time. I just knew my experience as a kid because I was like, 10 years old when he was doing this. Getting stung by bees on a playground was just like, no way. But now, facing my own gut issues, I'm like, okay, I'm not going to do the bee route, but I'll do the needle route. And so I went to an acupuncturist and she counseled me on my diet. She gave me treatments, helped my gut to heal and remedies. And within a couple months, most of my symptoms got better. And I was like, man, you saved my butt. Thank you. Went back to work, didn't think much of it until my symptoms started to come back a year later. And I was like, oh man, because at the time we were doing projects where we'd have robots being controlled by astronauts in the space shuttle on orbit. And the windows they have are like, okay, we have a half an hour window at 2:30 in the morning. So you got to prepare for the experiment. You got to be there at 2:30 to 3 a.m. and then you do whatever you need to do post experiment. So you have these like long, windows where you're kind of on and you're working on stuff and doing that, over and over again really took its toll on my gut.
All right.
And so it hit me, it's too much for me. I need to make a change. And I searched, I discovered this interview that Bill Moyers, he was on PBS a lot. He interviewed a guy named Joseph Campbell, and Joseph Campbell said, follow your bliss. And I'm like, follow my bliss? I don't even know what my bliss is. What? I thought it was NASA. And so then it hit me when I was on this search for several months that my bliss was really helping other people like my acupuncturist help me to solve these difficult health issues. So I just like, okay, I'm doing it, man. I'm going to leave NASA. My colleagues thought I was nuts. But the ones who knew my health challenges, they were like, man, you got a lot of courage.
Okay,
And
so before you make that switch, I want to go back and unpack some of these things because first I want to get an idea of the time frame because it sounded like when you first got to NASA as an intern, were you still in college? Did you
yeah,
just finish college?
I
Okay,
was still in college. Then after I graduated, I went to industry. Then I came back to NASA, and that's when I stayed at NASA for like 7 years.
okay. I was going to say, how long did it take for you to actually start working on projects where you would be up at 2:30 in the morning to work within those windows? Okay, so
Yeah, that was
7 years.
the robotics lab. Yeah.
Robotics lab. Okay. All right. So how soon after you got started there did the first symptoms kind of come about? And did you just kind of think they were food issues? You were eating the wrong stuff, or how did that start?
I didn't even think of food issues at all. My family's like a bunch of foodies. Like they go, half my family is Chinese, half my family is Korean. The Chinese part of the family would go to the restaurant and get that 8-course meal, and you're just pounding down a ton of food, over like 2 to 3 hours, and afterwards you're just like in a food coma. And so that was kind of like my relationship to food was okay, you go and have these big family kind of events and do the big meal thing. And so for me, food was just like I didn't think about it as something that could cause my problems at all
All right.
until the acupuncturist kind of coached me on, hey, this is, can create inflammation and things like that. So
All right. So you go to the doctor, tells you got IBS, gives you medication, doesn't work. How long did it take for you to actually accept that you needed to do something different and go to the acupuncturist?
it took me about 3 to 4 months of taking the medication to realize that, because I was like, I hope it'll work. It may just take time for it to kick in, but it just wasn't working, and that I needed to then do something different, and that's
Interesting.
what it took. Yeah.
So now help me understand. So I'll be honest, I've heard of acupuncturists all my life. I've never really understood what they do. I know that you get, poked with needles, and I always thought it had something to do with just your muscles and your tissue and that sort of thing where, you mentioned the arthritis. That's kind of where I thought that if you've got soreness or if you've got, things going on kind of like on the surface level. Um, but you're talking about some deeper stuff. So what is the range of an acupuncturist?
There's many different styles of acupuncture. Actually, I was trained in a couple of different styles. One of the traditions I studied in was actually taught by blind Japanese acupuncturists called Toyohari. And one of the main instructors there, he was kind of short, he had big ears and not much hair. And if he was green, he would look almost like Yoda from Star Wars. And so this is just Mr. Yanagisha.
Okay.
And he would teach us how to sense the energy and use acupuncture. You didn't even have to, with this style, you didn't even have to put the needle in the skin. You could just touch it to the skin. So it was outreless in a lot of ways. So when you have kids, when you have people who are really sensitive or needle phobic, and they experience this, they're like, "Oh my gosh, this is like amazing!" I was terrified, you know. And so, Uncle Marv, there's hope for you. You know, you can get acupuncture, and it may not, it may not hurt.
May not have to have the needle put in. Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so basically, in different recent studies, they discovered these microchannels, microfluidic channels in the body that correspond to the different acupuncture points and the pathways they lie on. So, like this fluidic, electrically charged pathways that they're in these really tiny structures in the body. And the theory is by doing the acupuncture in these points in a certain way, there's different techniques you can use to increase energy, disperse energy, or have it normalize or regulate depending on what system you're trained in. So this is what I studied a system called 5 element method, and then branched out to study other ones also. And basically, the there's a whole rich tradition, like thousands of years of Chinese medicine studies and texts, and obviously I haven't studied all that, but the a lot of it isn't just based on symptoms. That's kind of like there's like 3 levels of practitioners that have been written about in Chinese medicine. There's kind of like the base level practitioner that treats symptoms. And then there's a mid-level practitioner that treats like the person's core, like what they call constitution. And then there's the enlightened practitioner that treats without having you in the room, that treats before the remedy or the acupuncture needle touches you. And this is a tradition called Tong Shen Ming, or penetrating divine illumination. So it's kind of like this like spiritual healer form that's been written about, for over 1,000 years.
Okay. Now, these sound like, they're going to be something you would get if you were, in Asia proper, not here in the States. So, are these the types of things that you can actually study here?
The One of the scholars is actually a French woman who uh, would come and teach at our university, and she said, "Yes, the teachings are there, but the practices have been lost over time."
Okay.
So what I've done is like gone to other healing traditions and said, okay, how can I access this subtle energy, subtle sensing, refine that, and then use that to help patients identify what is going on and how to help them heal more quickly.
Okay. Gotcha. And then last question on acupuncture. Sorry for digging in here.
No problem.
Uh, I have a sense that there's probably a repetitive nature to this, much like, massage therapy, deep tissue, massage or whatever, that you don't just do it once. You need to do some sort of regularity with it. Is that the same with acupuncture?
If you go to the like kind of the base level practitioner, yes, you need to do the repetitive stuff.
Okay.
And sometimes less so with the kind of like mid level and the divine penetrating illumination one. Sometimes you don't need that much repetition. So it really depends on the skill of the practitioner and also what kind of issue you're treating.
Okay. All right. So I think that's given us the timeline that I was looking for. So now you get to the point where it worked for a while and then it didn't, and you had to move on. So let's talk about that.
So I went from, being an engineer to going back and to graduate school to study, Chinese medicine, acupuncture, herbal medicine. And w- it was much different. It was much more of s- understanding things that I needed to change in order to integrate and learn how to be a provider of medicine. It wasn't like engineering where I just have to know how to, different things to put things in space to make sure they don't fall apart in that harsh environment. But this is like, okay, there's a whole subtle or energetic relationship that's there. There's subtle sensing, there's subtle ways to help other people to heal, whether it be through needles or herbs or even just speaking and what they call energetic transmission.
Okay. Now, help me understand when you got that enlightened thought of follow your bliss,
Yeah.
was this what you thought it was going to be? I
No.
mean, because the engineering Star Trek mind in me had to think it had to be a complete switch.
Yeah. Well, when you hit a wall, you're kind of like, okay, that I can't go through the wall anymore. I got to find a new path.
Right.
And so I was open for the like, okay, up for like new doors opening. Joseph Campbell talked about when you follow your bliss, doors open that you never knew were there. You meet people who guide you, who support you in ways that, and they give you gifts and all these other things that you get that help change you, that help, you to get mastery of a new kind of world. And whether it be through illness, whether it be through earthquake, whether it be through, you know, some other life-changing event.
Okay.
And so, yeah,
So you're starting to do this, and at first, I imagine that you were dealing with a lot of normalities in terms of, the types of treatments, the types of people you were dealing with and stuff. Did you start to look at it from your perspective where, your stuff was kind of a stubborn, chronic, it wasn't just the run of the mill, go to the doctor, get healed, life is good. So did you go in thinking you were going to focus on these stubborn areas?
I started off focusing on like chronic pain
Okay.
because that was when you work at NASA, you think about, okay, what is the like Uber thing that I can do and that's gonna, make the world better or help advance science. So just dealing with someone's, you know, issue, it's not quite there. I wanted to pick something that was hard because I was used to solving hard problems and difficult challenges. And I had my own that I dealt with. So I wanted to say, okay, that was something I wanted to get help people that way to get that feeling of like, okay, I'm fulfilling a purpose that's greater than myself,
Okay.
which is that along the lines of following your bliss.
All right. So now I want to ask a question thinking of my audience because most of the audience, let's just say we range in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. So we are
Mm.
past our, young, active parts of our life where we just, bounce back and are athletic, going to the gym and all of that stuff. So a lot of us we're tired, our gut's a mess, our brains are foggy, and a lot of us just treat this as normal, as aging stuff. So, um, how do you differentiate what is normal versus, what are some red flags that we need to start paying attention to?
Well, first thing is, are you happy? Are you feeling like you're living your best life? Or are you feeling you're just kind of like, well, I just gotta like accept this is the way it is now?
Hmm.
And what's the difference is like, okay, if you're in that kind of like, I gotta accept it, there's this kind of like a de-energizing, kind of like blah state, right? So that is where I would start. When something is not working and not to just accept it or just kind of like, uh, you know, it's really something that may be and most likely improved upon. And, we have, lots of great tools, lots of great research on when people have too much inflammation, then that can create all sorts of problems. Like for me, it was gut problems. For other people, it's brain fog. For other people, it's fatigue. For other people, it could be swelling. So, and then looking deeper as like what's causing that. It's different than Western medicine, where it's just like, oh, you have inflammation. Well, here's an anti-inflammatory. Let's not look at the cause, or let's not address the cause so much. In other healing systems that I've studied, it's like it's totally about root cause, because the problem won't go away unless you address the root cause.
Right.
And that's where we're taking that. Okay, we have the ability to really understand things in a deep way using advanced technology, advanced medical scanning technology, and then based on that, we can customize treatments and remedies to each person to help them resolve the brain fog, the gut issues, the fatigue, the emotional, like, you know, just not feeling fulfilled in ways that aren't going to be taking years to do. They can be happen within months.
Okay. So before we transition into what you're actually doing now, I want to go back and ask the question, did you find your root cause?
My root cause was poor diet. I ate a lot of inflammatory foods. And also, I had emotional issues like stress and anger and frustration that I would hold in my gut. And when I worked on changing the diet, that was easy. But when I worked on the deeper, like hidden, like subconscious issues, then that was harder. And so, working with different medical providers or healers on how do I not only work on the, you know, dietary stuff, but the energetic, the emotional, underpinning causes.
Okay. So part of me imagines that working at NASA comes with stress. Am I
Yeah,
am I right about
working
that?
anywhere. Working anywhere comes with
Well, but
stress.
I mean,
Yeah.
NASA's gotta be a little bit more where you're dealing with stuff in space that you can't touch and feel once it leaves Earth. And so if it's not working, the gravity of which you've gotta make sure to get it fixed is gotta be, exponentially compounded, right?
Yes. I mean, that's why there's a lot of redundancy. There's a lot of, quality control, much more than Earth-based systems.
Okay. Backups for the backups.
Yep.
As we talk about. Okay. So now so you were able to figure out your stuff. So we talked about, um, me and my listeners that we might be in a situation where we should start looking at it. Um, so how can we start to, I guess, listen to our body to know that, okay, yeah, this is not normal. I'm feeling good. I mean, I'm feeling okay. I'm happy, but I know something's not right. What types of things can we listen to make that switch?
If you feel like you have to coach yourself into like, well, that's just the way it is, or I woke up on the wrong side of bed, or I'm getting older, or those kind of like thoughts that you're using to try to, you know, deal with a situation or a symptom, then that's looking at it at one level. And there's often deeper underlying factors that can, if you can address those, then that may resolve that fatigue, that brain fog, the gut issues, definitely gut issues, because that's one of the things that is really trending now. A colleague of mine, he's really into social media. He goes like, "Oh, gut issues are like all over the place now in terms of like on social media." And that's one of the things that, since I had that in my background, we see a lot of patients that have that as part of their big underlying issue is gut inflammation, gut infections, uh, and things like that.
All right, so let's dig into that just real quick because you're right. I've seen a lot talked about with gut issues, but I don't think anybody's ever described gut issues, outside of people thinking, yeah, I've got the dad belly. I just want to get it smaller. People that, you know, constantly feel like they've got gas or, that sort of a thing. But it's more than that. So, what are, I guess, the simplest symptoms we can look at in terms of gut issue?
When you eat, do you feel better? Do you feel like, wow, that was really great, satisfying? Or do you feel or worse?
Okay.
That's probably the most immediate thing that comes up. And because once the food hits the gut, then you have a reaction. It could be something in the stomach, it could be delayed, then maybe it's more in the small intestine. Or if it's even more delayed, it's in the large intestine. And so, by understanding the timing of these things, there could be a liver and gallbladder kind of issue. That because once food hits the stomach, you have these things secreting things like bile acids to digest fats and things like that. So
Right. So we're
it's
talking about
really a matter of
the time that
gut.
the food goes into your mouth, you know, the travel through the intestines, through the stomach, the gut, the liver, all of that, knowing the timing, obviously that's obviously a bigger deal. Now, how does somebody know if they have leaky gut?
Well, if they eat something and they feel like their intestines feel swollen, or they have gas, or they feel like, oh, I feel like my gut tightens up, or there's pain. And also brain fog, because you have this connection between your gut and your brain called the vagus nerve. There's other connections too, but that's one of the main ones. And when the gut sends signals that are saying, like, hey, I'm inflamed, I'm toxic, I'm not happy, that gets sent up into the brain, and that can create brain fog or emotional mood changes, or cognitive issues or insomnia. Lots of different ways it can show up in the brain.
Hmm, interesting.
So a lot of people think, "Oh, I have a brain issue," but no, actually, you have a gut brain issue.
Okay. Now, is
So
this considered part of autoimmune or is that
autoimmune is
separate?
autoimmune is your immune system's attacking your own cells,
Okay.
and so that like you want me to talk about a case study, autoimmune case study, or you want me to wait?
No, we can talk about it.
Okay, so I had a woman come in. And, she actually used to be a high-level government employee, and, she had the rank of a two-star general when she would go to meetings. So, really almost SES level, if you know what that is in government. But where I'm near Washington, so we talk about government all the time.
Okay.
And so, whenever she would hate dairy or other processed foods, her gut would get really crampy, and she would often vomit, and it would put her out of commission for several days. And so she went to her GI doc, she went to something called a functional medicine specialist, she went to acupuncturist, she went to herbalist, she went to nutritionist, and all of them did stuff that kind of helped a little, but still nothing touched this reaction. And then, she met me about 3, 4 years ago, and I told her about the scan that we're doing, and she goes like, "Wow, I need to do that." And so, we got her in here, and we started scanning her. This is a non-invasive scan. You put your hand on a device that sends, millions of amps electrical frequencies to the hand and then reads the response back. So, it's kinda like, sonar, as an analogy. You're pinging the body for an infection or the status of the liver or inflammation compounds, things like that. And so when we're in the middle of scanning her, I have a colleague of mine who helps me with this. And he says, I'm picking up a parasite in your intestines that's been there about 20 years. And her eyes got really big. And she said, I got food poisoning when I was on my honeymoon in Jamaica 25 years ago. And then we looked at the parasites, one called Giardia, and it says, "Oh, yeah, yeah, this one's found in Jamaica. That's probably when you got it." And that's and the scan also revealed this is causing an autoimmune reaction in your gut, which is causing whenever you put things like dairy or wheat or other carbs in there, that causes that huge reaction that makes you want to vomit. And so, based on that, we customize a program for her to help stop that autoimmune reaction using different supplements to detox the gut, to heal it. Because when you have this prolonged gut issue, gut infection, you get leaks in the intestines. They, the toxins, the infections, they disrupt the cell walls in there. And so, what normally gets excreted then leaks into the bloodstream. The bloodstream sees it as an invader and it goes alarm bells. And when it sees that, it dumps tons of inflammation into the gut and the intestines, and then you have this big bloat event occur. And so she would always like go to restaurants and go, "Does this have any dairy or blah 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 these ingredients in there?" And some fats would also do it with her also. And of course, not every wait staff is that up on what's in a dish, and so occasionally she would have these events where she would be dosed with dairy and it'd have the reaction. So we work with her for several months, and about 3 months in, she's taking remedies, she's getting treatments, um, and she goes to a restaurant, and they dose her with dairy, even though she asks, "Is there dairy in this?" And she goes to me, "I didn't die." She was like really happy, and I'm like, "Way to go!" But don't don't just start eating cheese now or something. And so what we started to do is getting out the parasite, the Giardia, using different remedies, homeopathic remedies, herbals, essential oils, and also frequency medicine. We send electrical frequencies using something called frequency specific microcurrent that are anti parasite frequencies we can send into the intestines, the large intestine, the small intestine, the liver, the gallbladder, wherever you have a frequency for in the body, you can piggyback this carrier healing frequency onto it and send it directly into those tissues, organs, cells, systems. So this is kind of like Star Trek medicine as I kind of nutshell it.
Yeah, it
And
sounds like it.
so,
It's pretty advanced.
yeah. And so as we're doing this treatment on her, she's having less of these reactions. And at the 5 month mark, she goes like, "Guess what? I'm eating cheese and I'm not having a reaction." So she went 20 years having this kind of severe gut autoimmune flare up reaction. No one can figure it out. We determine it's this parasite, heal the gut, get the inflammation down, expel the parasite. Boom. She's eating cheese on a regular basis.
Wow. All right. So that's the type of stuff that you're doing now. That is a pretty amazing story. Um, and that story kind of helps understand why we get things confused because, like you mentioned, autoimmune, her issue was kind of, you know, all in there because it was affecting the gut. And we could have very easily, you know, assumed it was just simply a gut issue. And
And her doctor gave her immunosuppressants. That didn't work. It didn't help. It made her feel worse. All this extra weight gain, also. And so there's a certain level you can treat at, on a symptom level. And there's also the underlying factors that you have to identify in order to have this transformation that took 20 years for her to get here. And 3, 4 months later, she's like, "Okay, wow, I'm not reacting like that anymore."
wow. Okay. So here's what I want to do. I want to go deeper into what you're doing now, but we're coming up just about 35 minutes. So I want to go ahead and end this part of the interview and come back and do a part two and dig deeper into what you're doing because I just briefly, glossed over it. That you run the uh, the Lyme Disease Research Center, um, Research Healing Center, And we never really explained that. You talked about it a little bit as part of the process with your scanning. Um, and we really just got through a lot of the stuff with talking about, you know, stubborn chronic disease, fatigue, gut issues. So I'm going to come back and dig deeper into what you're doing at the Lyme Research Healing Center. Let's see here. Let's make sure I want to do this before we forget. You have an exclusive free video that you want to make available to the listeners of the Unhealthy Podcast. That link will be in the show notes, folks. And it's basically going to be if you're riding in the car. Obviously, you can click the link, but if you want to write it down because you're somewhere, it's Lyme Research Center .com/Marv, MARV as in Victor. So you can go see that and it'll give you natural therapies for rapid relief of stubborn pain, fatigue, and gut issues. So, Greg, thank you for that.
Yeah.
And we'll take a pause here and we'll be back with part two.